Lord willing, tonight and tomorrow night we will finish up text on Genesis. And just a brief explanation, we're going to be doing from 42 to 46. And part of the reason is that I just chose to spend more time on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I wouldn't use the word the Trinity of the patriarchs, but just those three men are so diverse in many different ways, and yet they're also so significant in showing God working with different generations through different situations. And we mentioned this way back even with Abraham. Those of us who've had children, especially teenage children in school, there are several years we don't have a name. We're Luke's dad or we're Heather's dad to a whole group of their peers and things. I can't explain this very well, but it always just moves me that which is spirit and eternal would be known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To me, there's just few things that are any more touching about both the nature and the purpose of God that, and I'm confident that once we get on the other side, there's things that we'll understand that we can only see dimly right now. But for He who is eternal and He who is spirit, to be known through the rest of Scripture as I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It shows us a lot about the nature of His fatherhood. It also shows us and we'll touch on this again next week. When I do an outline of the Old Testament, I just do a V for the first 11 chapters, and then that thread that starts with Abraham runs through from there. So, central idea tonight. Joseph tested his brothers when they came to buy grain in Egypt. Tested is used in part of the texts. I could think a lot of things to do to my brothers other than be as kind to them as he was under the circumstances. And as we're going to see, the word test is very appropriate. And obviously, they have no idea who he is. It's just beyond their comprehension that the person they're dealing with is their younger brother. But I think there's also a sense where, and not being, not necessarily being devious, not being unnecessarily cruel, I think he also wants to see, have they actually grown any spiritually from the guys who put him in the pit and sold him to Egypt? And I didn't write this down in text tonight, but you look at the first three, I'm talking about Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, they each disqualify themselves from being the seed through which Jesus is going to come. Reuben is going to sleep with one of his father's concubines. Simeon and Levi convince the whole town to be circumcised in order to one of them to marry their sister, and then they murder the entire town. And then you come along, and Judah commits adultery with his daughter-in-law, which is going to then become a part of the seed coming on to Jesus. And so all of them have their own disqualifiers or their own faults in terms of thinking, oh yes, this is going to be the one through whom the seed is going to come. However, as we look at the events, and like I said, we'll just be able to highlight some things, Judah is the one out of the group who comes forward to be the intercessor. He's going to plead with his father. And Benjamin is obviously the new favorite. Joseph has been. And this is just still also very sad. And I think about the other 10 brothers. We're going to read some text tonight from Joseph that if you're one of the other 10 brothers, you have to feel slighted. And the affection that he had for Joseph, and I think it's 22 years from last week that he has mourned the loss of Joseph, has now virtually been placed in his relationship with Benjamin. More of us will be grandparents than parents, but I think it's important that we each do the best we can to love each of our children for their own virtues and maybe even their own faults rather than having obvious favorites. And we're going to see this still showing up in Joseph's reluctance to send Benjamin, and yet Judah is going to be the one who steps forward and says, I'll be responsible for him. When the money is put back in the sacks and the silver cup is in Benjamin's sack, then Judah is the one who goes forward to Joseph and says, put me in prison, let him go, because this will just have unimaginable consequences to our father. And the word priesthood is not used, and obviously Levi is going to be the descendant of the priests of the Old Testament. But when you look at, with the change of the covenant, there must be a change. Well, let's do it the other way. With the change of the priesthood, there must be a change of the covenant. And Jesus is going to come from the family of Judah. And Jesus is, yes, he's going to be the Son of God, but he's also going to be a priest like Melchizedek, one of a kind. But I just want you to notice how Judah is going to take, if I can use the term, a priestly role tonight. He is going to be the one who admonishes his father and put me responsible, let me take the blame for that. And then when the cup is found in Joseph's sack, and it's just unimaginable that they're going to go home without the youngest brother, that this will just break their father's heart altogether, then Judah is going to be the one who steps forward. And the word priest is not used, and I'm not saying that it is, but I'm just using the sense, he's the one who intercedes for the well-being of other people. Even though he were a son, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And like I said, the word priest is not used, and I don't intend to be used in that sense, but just notice, out of the brothers, and as devious as they are, Judah is the one who kind of rises to the top. And as we'll see, Lord willing, next week, when specific promises then are made, then whether it's in Matthew or however you want to read it, the lineage that's going to come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is going to go through Judah. And I think a part of it is his growing into being the brother who intercedes for others, and that's going to be very much like Jesus is going to be for us years later. And we're just going to see how Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. So we'll do some highlights, and we'll have a lot to cover, and then we'll do some application toward the end. So in Genesis 42, the famine has come, as Joseph has predicted, and Jacob sends the sons down to Egypt, and we find in 42:6, Joseph is governor over the land. And you have to think about this. What goes through your mind if you're Joseph when the brothers come and they bow down to him?
Fulfill the dream.
Yeah, they obviously don't know it's him, and it's just unimaginable. And even when he reveals himself to them, they are just in a total state of shock. And so all these events are going to take place, and no one even considers the possibility this could be our brother. I mean, the whole thing looks like the Egyptian. I'm sure the hairstyle is different. None of us look a whole lot different 20 years later than we did from our high school pictures. And all these things have taken place, and then for him to be an Egyptian, dressed as an Egyptian. It just never crosses their mind that this is Joseph. The other thing that I just find very interesting, Joseph is going to understand all of their conversation. Our oldest daughter is very, very fluent in Spanish. She's not quite 6 foot, very Caucasian. Every time she goes out to eat in a Mexican restaurant, she hears all kinds of things because nobody assumes that the Caucasian girl is fluent in 3 dialects of Spanish. And occasionally her husband will say, "Are you eavesdropping?" Heather says, "Well, it's hard not to listen when, when they're talking about you and saying things." And it just never crosses their mind that, oh, she's an immigration attorney, so she talks in Spanish all day long. But outwardly, you would never know. And it's just amazing what she hears because of that. And I think of this when I read this about Joseph. The brothers, because he is Egyptian, are going to have all these conversations. And I can just imagine at a point in time, they're all in shock. He's heard everything. I mean, this is still his native tongue. And you just think about the interaction that's going to take place, but also the burden that's in his heart as he listens to the brothers. So he asked them, "Where did you come from?" And in verse 8, he recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man." Here's a bit of a whopper. "We are honest men." Yeah, never mind that we threw our brother into a well and we sold him as a slave and all this other stuff. And, you can count on us. We're honest men. If I'm Joseph, I'd have to cough at least a little bit. And my thought was, you have watched your father cry his eyes out for 22 years and haven't peeped. That's the part that bothers me the most in terms of just family. You have watched an older man just nearly cry himself into his grave, and you've kept this secret to yourself. You've never told him what happened to Joseph, and you just let that go on. How do you say this? How do you live with yourself to know that you are withholding information that would just change everything? And for all of those 22 years, not a one of them gives any hint to what happened. So I just cough a little bit when I read, "Oh, we are honest men." So the accusation is, "You're spies." And I use the word tests. He tests them by demanding that they have spoken the truth by bringing Benjamin to Egypt. And he locks them up for 3 days. It could have been worse, but testing is a very interesting word that's used of how God deals with us. It's not the word tempt. "Let no man say when he's tempted, I'm tempted of God." God cannot be tempted with evil, and neither tempts he any man. However, there are several times in Scripture that God will test someone, and very specifically on Sunday night, there's tests that are being given to Job, that God will allow things to happen that will test a person, which is very different than Satan trying to tempt them. And in this sense, Joseph is testing his brothers. I don't know all the reasons why. I can't read his mind. A part of it will just be, well, where are they at? Both kind of spiritually and socially for all the time that he has been in Egypt. Here's a term we're going to look at, and this is this thread that runs us all the way through the very end of the book. "Do not be afraid, I fear God." I wonder. I wonder, would Joseph ever have ended up being the person that he became with the adversity that we're going to see he goes through, had he been constantly surrounded by 10 brothers who just criticized him and put him down all the time for 20 years? I've just met with people who've just been emotionally beat to death by a brother or sister or family or something, and it just had such an impact on them. Like I said, this is part of God's plan, and this is what he's going to say. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. But a part of it is that with the adversity that Joseph goes through, which is very personal and very direct, in some ways it's very, very different than the adversity had he been living for the last 22 years with 10 brothers who are just constantly, well, they hate him. That's all there is to it. And I think the same thing with Daniel. Would Joseph and Daniel ever become who they were as mature spiritual men had they been left in their original environment? And we see God working with them, and we'll touch on this, Lord willing, a bit next week. One is going to go south toward the beginning of the Old Testament. Daniel's going to go to the north toward the end. And I just always think of, here's this wonderful parentheses that Scripture opens and closes with God sending godly young men into foreign lands, and the character and the spirituality they developed in captivity is this shining light that leads God's people through a lot of things. So he accuses them, and you have to bring your younger brother, and the bold print in 21, and see, they say to one another, we are guilty concerning our brother. We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. And this is why this distress has come upon us. And that's what I want you to notice. If Joseph's close by, he's hearing every bit of this. And we're not given all the spatial details, but it's very likely, well, they're not going to assume, since he is so Egyptian, that he's able to understand them. And they're kind of recounting and going through all of those events that happened. And Reuben, and he was taking the initiative, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen, so now there comes a reckoning for his blood. They didn't know that Joseph understood them. There's an interpreter. He turned away and wept. He said to his brothers, my money's been put, and this is, time goes on, they get on the road, and the money's in the sack, and their heart fails them. And the question is, what is this that God has done to us? So the brothers come back. Simeon is left in prison, and Jacob just digs his heels in and just will not, as the brothers said, we could have gone twice. So there's an extended period of time, and I'm sure they're getting hungrier, they're with less food and everything else. And the brothers keep pushing, Father, we need to take our younger brother down because we're going to starve to death if we don't go and get the food. You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. Take Benjamin. And Reuben said, kill my two sons if I don't bring him back. But the father's going to say, he will not go down. His brother's dead, and he's the only one left. If harm should come to him on the journey, what are you to make? You will bring my gray hairs down with sorrow. And as we've noticed, I just call it the blight of favoritism. And we did more of this last week. But Isaac is the favorite over Ishmael. Jacob is the favorite over Esau. And then Joseph, and now Benjamin is the favorite over the other brothers. And the point that we've made is that in all of our families, we pass down more than just the color of our eyes and the color of our hair. There are just certain traits that are family traits that are passed down. And all of us just need to kind of examine our own families because they're all uniquely different in different ways. But if you're the oldest brother, one of the older brothers, how does this come across to you? You know, it's just very clear, Dad's favoritism. Well, you're not even included in the list, and that would just have a detrimental effect on them. Let's go to the next page. On in 43, Jacob refuses to send Benjamin, so there it is. Judah intercedes. Send the boy with him. I will be a pledge, verse 9, for his safety. If I do not bring him back, set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we hadn't been delayed, we'd return twice. So finally, Jacob agrees, take some choice gifts of the land. They're going to take some fruit, balm, honey, myrrh, pistachio nuts, almonds, take double the money. And, verse 14, may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man. may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I'm bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. It's a very, very different, but I hear a lady saying, if I perish, I perish. And regardless of the consequences, Esther's going to go in. And finally, the dad just says, well, if this costs me my sons and I'm bereaved, then you go ahead. And they go back, and you'll notice from verses 15 on, the steward confirms that they had made the original purchase, and they're waiting for Joseph's appearance. So we're about halfway down, 43:26. Joseph came, and they brought into the house the present they had made. They bowed down to the ground. Is your father well? Is he still alive? They bowed their heads, prostrated themselves. He lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? Now stop and think. Benjamin is probably 8 years younger than Joseph. That's pretty close. And how big was Benjamin when Joseph is sent into slavery, and then he's been gone for 22 years? So he doesn't look anything like he was as this small brother, little brother, when he left. And so that was obviously a very honest, information-seeking question. Is this your brother? And God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. You just think, you've been separated from your family, all this stuff has happened to you, and now you see your family for the first time. Our middle child, or daughter, was born in Australia and was 18 months when we came back. My mom had wanted to take a family portrait, which we did, and the funniest part is that the girl on the bottom left hand is named Nancy Price. They're not engaged, which my mom was really upset that she spent all this money. So the hand is over her left hand in the photo because she doesn't have a ring on, but she's in the family portrait that's going to be, kept forever and ever. And but from the time our kids were born, and like I said, 18 months before we came home, every night we'd stop and say, this is your grandma, this is your granddad, this is Uncle Kent, and we'd have a Bible story and just show them those. From acceleration to touchdown, our flight back was 21 hours and 45 minutes and 50 seconds. And we had 3 seats. We land on the 3rd of December, and our little one is born on the 27th, so she's virtually 9 months pregnant. And I have a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old in 2 seats flying across the Pacific. There's a lot of togetherness by the time we get back. We're just exhausted. We're the last ones off of the plane. My dad was never anywhere to be seen when we left, but he would be at the airport an hour early anytime we came home. And people could go to the gate, and he would be the first one, and he's about this tall with this cowboy hat. And Heather's on my left hip. We're finally getting off the plane. Sheila's exhausted. We've tuggled and struggled. And here's an 18-month-old girl, and she's on my hip, and as soon as we walk out, she says, "That's my granddaddy." Wow. And she reaches out and hugs his neck, and he starts crying, and she's talking Australian. He can't understand a word that she's saying. She's just going on and on. But you think, what emotion would you have as Joseph? He has to ask, is this the one? And you've missed all those growing up, you missed all the teenage years, and now you finally see your own brother all these years later, and you can just understand the emotion that's there, that it just overcomes him, and he seeks a place to weep. How amazing. They sat at the table from oldest to the youngest, and Benjamin has 5 times the portion. They drank and were merry with them. Then as they go again, the cup is put in Benjamin's sack, and they are overtaken. This is 44:4. Why have you repaid evil for good? And again, Judah intercedes. What shall we speak? How can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. And Judah intercedes for the brother and for the events that have taken place, which may be one of the reasons why he becomes the descendant through which the seed is passed on. So on the next page, the discussion is, my wife bore 2 sons, one is left. I said, surely he's been torn to pieces. I've never seen him. And there again is the sense of the servant and the things that are taking place. When you look in chapter 45, Joseph is going to provide for his brothers and his family. And again, the expression is that he wept. And he finally reveals himself. He sends the servants and the other people out. 45:3, his brothers could not answer him. They were dismayed at his presence. And you just think they just would never, ever have considered that this is the brother that they sold into slavery 22 years earlier. I mean, they just would there would be no way that they could ever possibly understand that that's who it is. And he says, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or angry. And we'll talk about this in a second. God sent me before you to preserve life. From just a human point of view, I doubt that Joseph felt this way the first few nights he's in prison as a slave. And one of the amazing things is that through the adversity that he goes through, and there had to be seeds of faith planted in him, hopefully by his mom and by his dad, and in spite of the other rivalry that took place between the family. Well, I'll just say it this way. Our oldest is a son, and you would just hope nothing like this happens. But one of the things that I thought about as Luke grew up in our house is that if something happens to him at 17 and we don't see him for a period of time, a long period of time, will he have enough faith while he's lived with us that he can maintain faith on his own in adversity?
Good question.
And that's the amazing thing, is that under just deplorable betrayal of his own family, we all know, that's what I've said several times, trials and temptations, we come to an intersection, and some people are going to turn away from God and blame God, and they will never come back. And the same trial for other people will draw them closer to God.
That's right.
And here's this amazing thing, is that with all the things that he goes through, the number of times that he's betrayed and on, for whatever reason, Joseph continues to turn to God rather than to blame God and turn away from him. And that's something that in different ways all of us will probably have to deal with at one time or another. So in verse 7, God sent me to preserve you for a remnant on the earth, to keep you alive, many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. This to me is the result of you wouldn't come to this conclusion overnight. If I'm 17 years old and my sorry brothers have sold me into prison, there'd be some nights I would just clench my fist in anger, not just only at them, but in terms of my circumstances, and everything has changed, and where's God, and why did this happen, and all these different questions that would be very human and very normal. Then Joseph, and it's not like he has other people to help him. He's there on his own. But Joseph chooses to turn to God in adversity rather than turn away from God. And he's going to do that repeatedly under different circumstances that happened. So I would just love to see the look on the brothers' faces. I mean, just absolute, shock isn't even near strong enough. Just could not imagine that this is their brother. And have no concern for your, well, he kissed all of his brothers. He wept upon them. His brothers talked with them. And the instructions are, go back, get dad, bring him down. And I always laugh with this in verse 24, and I put it in bold. As they departed, he said, don't quarrel on the way. He knows them very well. Okay? No fights on the way. You guys, keep your nose clean. Take care of each other. And when they tell the father, his heart became numb and he didn't believe them. And again, I would have some real anger at the boys who've kept this from me for all this time once I find out what happened. There's just a lot of processing emotional things that are going to be taking place. And when you look at the wagons and the stuff, the Spirit of the Father revived. So in chapter 46, Beersheba's been an important place with different ones of the patriarchs. He offers a sacrifice to the God of his father Isaac, and God appears to him. And as we notice, the appearances of God are getting fewer and fewer the further we go through the book of Genesis. And God is going to appear to Jacob again and reaffirm, I'm the God of your father. Do not be afraid. Go down to Egypt. I will make you a great nation. 46:4. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. I will bring you up again, and Joseph's hand will close your eyes. And the last part of that, 70 people are going to go into Egypt. And here it is, and for a good reason. Judah is sent ahead to Joseph to show the way before him to Goshen. And so if we use like the term scout, we're going to send one of the brothers down to kind of see this is where we're going. Here's where the track is, and here's where we're going to take place. And like I said, these things are up to God as far as the choice. But Judah is going to be the fourth of the brothers. And yet when the promises are going to be given and the blessings are going to be given, Lord willing, next week, then Judah is going to be the one that has the scepter. And I can't hardly say this because it's still very hard. In the end, Leah wins. She won the contest with the boys 8-4. Rachel's buried along the way. Leah is buried with the family grave. And Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are going to be very important in the development of Israel. But Judah is going to be the one through whom the lineage of Christ comes. And this competition that was held between the two sisters, it's going to be Leah's son, who then is going to be in the genealogy that's going to bring us to Jesus. So Joseph prepared the chariot to meet his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept for a good while. I'm sure there were times he wondered if he would ever see his dad. Israel said, "Let me die. I have seen your face, and I know you're alive." And instructions are given. We're shepherds. We keep livestock, and shepherds are an abomination, so then they can go live in the land of Goshen, which is a very prosperous part of Egypt. So the first readers, and I think about this a lot, who read Genesis through Deuteronomy for the first time? They're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At least 400 years was spoken about their sojourn in Egypt. There's also a couple of passages with 430, and Lord willing, we'll see these in Exodus. But notice Genesis 15:13, all the way back with Abraham. Your descendants will be strangers in a land. They will serve them, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. And Acts 7 and 6, same type thing. The descendants will dwell in a foreign land for 400 years. But here's this number that's just burnt in my mind. 70 souls go down. How long is it going to take to end up with 603,550 fighting men? And as I said before, this is military age. So this isn't the kids and the teenagers. This isn't the older men. This is not the grandmothers, the mothers, the sisters. In my mind, it's very plausible up to 3.5 million people are going to come out of Egypt. Everybody follow just what happened? If you've got 603,000, roughly 20 to 40 something fighting age men, then you start putting their families and the people around them. I don't mean this to be too trite, but I think it's basically like taking the state of Oklahoma and heading toward Arizona. Wouldn't you like to be responsible for that? When they tell Joshua, we will follow you just like we followed Moses, I would want to run behind the nearest mountain and hide. Just because it was just, they were never happy. It just went on and on. But it's a huge group of people when we can identify, here's the fighting men, and then you put the families around them, then they go in as 70, and then look at the size of the crossing of the Red Sea and the size of the manna and the quail and the feeding that takes place and those things. But they've been slaves for decades, years. They have not been in the promised land. And the promise is, I will give you this land, but the original readers have all lived and grown up basically in Egypt. If you look at the next page, we're not going to do anything other than just notice this. Here are the names of the descendants. I'll leave you to read those in 46. And you'll see that they give them in different categories. The first group are going to be 33, and then 16, 14, and 7. And again, that original promise, come outside, count the stars tonight. If you can count the stars, your descendants will be like the sand of the seashore. And for the promises made to Abraham from the time he's 75 through 99, Isaac is conceived and born when he's 100. Then these promises that God has made from the man, the family, the tribes, and then finally the nation, then God is going to be fulfilling this. But 70 souls are going to go into Egypt at this particular time. Last page. I just said, by the grace of God, Joseph has endured 13 years of slavery and captivity. It's not half, but if he's 17, I mean, that's a huge chunk of his life. Can I use the term? I think of the kind of, here he is in the prime of his life. And whether it's in Potiphar's household or the other slavery that he was involved. But he did this without being overcome by resentment and anger toward those who continually let him down. We touched on this before, but notice this is Psalm 105, starting verse 6. God summoned a famine on the land. He broke all the supply of bread. He sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put in a collar of iron until what he had said come to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. And I would just feel like it would be very easy to rationalize, God, I keep trying to do the right thing and people just keep letting me down. And that seemed to happen over and over again. But as we said a couple of weeks ago, we learn more about God through the rearview mirror than we do the windshield. And sometimes the things at the moment can just seem just hard for us to either deal with or comprehend. And by the grace of God, sometimes we get through that and then we look back and then we think, okay, in ways that I never could understand at the time, God was working either with me or through me while this was going on. And that process was very much a part of Joseph's life. Little did the brothers, this is 2:1. This comes from Eddie Clower's book on that psalm. They didn't understand the statement, I fear God. And if you just had kind of a couple of words to describe Joseph at this point of his life, that's it. I fear God. That's who he was. This is one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament. 1 Chronicles 16:9. The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. That's just an amazing verse. And you think if he knows the hairs on our head, he knows us and our hearts better than we know our hearts ourselves. And that's why I was talking with a dear friend this week, and he's doing lessons from Mark 12, and the first and the greatest is love the Lord your God with all your heart. And I tell parents, if we don't win our children's hearts, we don't have to worry about the rest of it. Guard your heart with all diligence, for from it come the issues of life. And that's why this is just such an important thing. He supports those whose heart is completely his. God searches for individuals who have spiritual character that embraces his goodness and righteousness. Because of Joseph's faithfulness and good heart, he was made an avenue through which God worked toward fulfilling his promises all the way back to Abraham. God works things for good on that person's behalf. And I just said, even if they don't seem good at the time, God was able to work through him and to accomplish more than Joseph could ever imagine. So, and this will come up even more next week. But notice how often God is on Joseph's thoughts and on his lips while living as an exile in Egypt. And you think, how old is he and how long has it been since he's seen his father? He's been living in a foreign land surrounded by images, idols, idolatry, and has never lost his faith in his walk with God. Do not be afraid, 42:18, I fear God. The head of his household, his servant, your God, the God of your fathers, has put the treasure in. And when he meets them, this is the youngest brother, God be gracious to you. And then the expression is, God has found out the guilt of your servants. But here's the refrain that we'll carry into next week. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. So he doesn't lie and fudge about what happened. You sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth, to keep alive for many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, the lord of his house, and ruler all of the land of Egypt. Hurry and go get my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord over all Egypt. Come down and do not tarry. Genesis 45:7-9. So think about this. I don't know how to say this, but just think about this from the point of view of Jesus. At some point, each of the 12 in their own way deserted him or let him down. And all of us at one time or another will have disappointment from people around us. And I've tried so hard to talk with people occasionally, say, I'm not going to go back to that church because of the hypocrites that are there. And if you've talked to people, you hear some people that will say that. And I want to say to them, but please don't let those people keep you from heaven. That's not God's character. And to miss out on something that's eternal because of the deficiencies of other people is going to be such a tragedy. And with all the things that happened to Joseph, he chooses to focus on God rather than on the ways that he was mistreated. So here's the last thought from Eddie Clower. In hindsight, Joseph could see how God used, and look at these three things, the jealousy of his brothers, the lying tongue of Potiphar's wife. Do you ever drive down the street where Potiphar and his wife lived just to let her see him driving by in a chariot? He's probably more spiritual than I would have been. But But just imagine, at some point, he is going to come across Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar again. I'm convinced that sometimes silent is the best retribution. To say something and on is probably not good, but you think about that, the jealousy of the brothers, the lying tongue of Potiphar's wife, the forgetfulness of the chief butler to accomplish his purposes for God's covenant people. His prophetic dreams did not come to pass until he had gone through a severe trial. Isn't this true? Joseph had to be a patient sufferer before he could be a powerful sovereign.
That's good.
His loyalty under strain demonstrated his faith in God and his deep-seated faithfulness to doing what was right. And how many times does Scripture say the Lord was with him? I want to close with this. I loved Howard Norton. Don Van Zandt, his cousin, said, I wish I could be excited about anything as Howard is about everything. And if you knew Howard, he was just gung-ho about so many things. This isn't in print, but it's come to mind. We were talking about this some today. We were in class one day, and Howard said, I never understand these guys with a Paul complex that think they can do better mission work by themselves than when they're married. He said, guys, don't you ever, ever, ever go to the mission field single. Marry a good woman because she'll do twice the work so you can get twice the credit. There's a lot of truth in that. The partnership is what's so important. But one day, as he was just reflecting on his life and his ministry, he just said this, I'm convinced that none of us will ever know the most important thing we did for God during our lifetime. God may use something small, like a cup of cold water, to accomplish things that we could never have seen coming or imagined. Be faithful in each and every opportunity you have, and leave the results to God. Could you ever imagine being thrown into a pit by your brothers and ending up riding in one of Pharaoh's chariots down a street in Egypt?
Thank you, Brother.